So today I'm going to be starting chapter 19, which is on populations. And I'll be covering section 1, which is on the properties of populations. So a population, which we learned about at the beginning of this whole unit, is a group of organisms that belong to the same species in a particular place. So if you think about all of the lions that live in Africa, or the hyenas, cheetahs, things like that, but it's only one species, whereas a community would be all of the species in one particular area. The properties of populations are different from individuals, and population study focuses on the population as a whole. So there's a lot of different aspects to population ecology. When you look at the birth rate, the death rate, how big the population is, what the density is like if they're all living in a small area or if they're spread out over a large area. If they are spread out, how are they spread out? Are they, like, if you think about watching Animal Planet, you might think about the difference between, say, a herd of gazelle, which travel in groups called a herd, versus cheetahs or leopards, who are more individual, unless they're very young and they're still learning to hunt with their mother. So the two main characteristics of a population are population size and population density. So population size obviously is just how big it is, how many individuals the population contains. Depending on the kind of population you're looking at, this might be difficult to measure directly. If the population is small, it might be easy to count if the organisms that you're studying are sessile or immobile, meaning they don't move, like plants. But more often, especially if you're talking about zoological or animal-based ecology, obviously animals move around, and so you'd have to be able to identify individuals to know whether or not you've already counted them. Now, thinking about the kind of population you're going to study, whether it's, say, lions, might be easy to identify based on their coloration, their markings, or size, if there's any scars or notable physical differences in their appearance, versus if you're studying a colony of ants, which obviously live mainly underground and they all look identical. It might be more difficult to assess the size. So the way that scientists get around the difficulties around estimating population size is that they do just that. They estimate population size. So they might take a smaller section. So for example, I have an example here. If you've got a 10 square kilometer patch of land, they might only look at 1 square kilometer, and then they'll extrapolate, meaning they'll just multiply that population size by 10 to estimate that. This is a problem if the distribution of individuals is not random or even. And part of what I'll talk about in a couple of minutes is the types of distribution we have. So let's say, for example, you're studying colonies of ants, and the square kilometer that you are analyzing just happens to have more ant hills than the rest of it. You might overestimate the size of the population, or vice versa. If you have only one ant hill where the average number of ant hills per square kilometer is like 2 or 3, you're going to underestimate it. Number 2 is population density. I've got a population density of Thailand map here, which you can see. I don't know if that's for, I'm guessing it's for humans. Yeah, it must be. Is it? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where I got this from. It's been a long time since I've made these slides, but anyway, so this is a population density map anyway. So you can see whatever species we're looking at. These are the main cities are denoted by these red dots. If you look at the key down here, there is a scale as far as like distance is concerned. And then you've got the population densities by color. So the more orange the color is, the more densely populated the area is. Sorry about that. Don't know why it does that. Okay. Right. So population size is just how big it is. Population density, basically a measure of how crowded a population is. This is always expressed as the number of individuals per unit of area or volume, depending on if you're talking about species that reside in water, you're going to be doing units of volume. So yeah, this is for human population. It would help if I actually read this. So Thailand's population density is 126 people per square kilometer, which if you think about how big a square kilometer is, that's not that crowded, to be honest. And so you can see where the most densely populated areas are. So we have the northeast here around Nakhon Ratchasima, and what is it, Uban Ratchatham, whatever. And up here in Chiang Mai, we've got a tiny little area here around Bangkok, and then down here in the south around Nakhon Si Thammarat. And then you've got the protected areas, so people literally cannot live there. A lot of, and I'm actually glad to see that there's a lot of protected areas. So you can see here in green. All right, and the third characteristic of population is its dispersion, which is just how a population is spread in the area. There are 3 types of dispersion, which I've got examples of each of them. One is clumped, which you see here in schools of fish. This would also apply to herds of animals like elephants, deer, gazelle, lions even, because they travel in prides. You've got uniform or even distribution, which you see most often with animals that are territorial. So for the penguin population here, especially during mating season, they're going to be evenly distributed because they each need their own amount of space to what do you call that, incubate their egg and then raise their young. So they'll be evenly distributed. And then finally, you have random distribution or dispersion. This is most likely reflected in plant species because of the way that the seeds or spores are carried by the wind or by water. So we'll look at each of these individually. Clumped dispersion is where you have individuals clumped together or clustered together. This results from social behavior. What we like to say is safety in numbers. So if you are a frequent victim of predation, if you are prey, your species might have evolved to have a safety in numbers or a clumped dispersion strategy. Because if you are in a group of 100 other individuals, you are less likely to be a victim of predation as you are if you are on your own. Even distribution, another example is flamingos. This is also a result of social behavior, but instead of being safety in numbers, this is more about territory. It's territorial behavior. And finally, random distribution is completely independent of other individuals. You might have a group clustered in one area and then some of them spread out further later on. And like I said, a lot of this is due to water and wind dispersal of seeds. So clumped, even, and random distribution are the 3 types of dispersion that occur in populations. Okay, now we have the dynamics within a population. This is going to be any factors that affect the size, density, survival of the species. Because all populations are dynamic, which is the opposite of static, they change in size, they change in composition, they're always changing. So we have to look at the types of aspects of the population that are changing and why they change. So we need more information besides population size, density, and dispersion in order to determine how and why a population changes over time. So 3 things that we look at are birth rate, mortality or death rate, and life expectancy. These should be self-explanatory. They also apply to human populations as well, which is, I think, something that I talk about at the end of this unit, maybe, and how human population is out of control. If not, I will bring it up on myself. So birth rate, obviously, the number of births in a period of time. Death rate, the number of deaths. And life expectancy is how long an average individual is expected to live. So here we have something called age structure, which is the distribution of individuals among different ages in a population. This is extremely important when you're looking at the dynamics of a human population, especially when it comes to, what do you call it, like the economy of a country, for example. So if you look at these 3 different countries, in Sweden, it looks like you have a pretty even distribution. I'm like pointing at my screen without realizing. Here we go. So if you look at Sweden, you've got a pretty even distribution between males and females over the entire age range. Okay, so you see a bit of a decrease when it comes to elderly males. This is most likely due to the fact that human males have a lower life expectancy than females. In Mexico, you see a huge difference. You just look at what this graph implies. You have a very large population of young people, but as you go over in age, it's almost exponentially smaller. You have very, very few individuals that reach the age of, say, 70 plus. And then in the United States, you have something that's kind of in between Sweden and Mexico. You have a very large population in the reproductive age range. Sorry, I'm just going to make sure that, everyone here is except Owen, but he's at military, I heard. So there we go. Okay, so again, we've got an average distribution of human population over all of the age ranges in Sweden. Mexico, obviously, most of their individuals are very young. And so what we can infer from this graph is that life expectancy is quite a bit lower in Mexico than it is in either Sweden or the United States, just by the sheer fact that the number of elderly people is so, it decreases so exponentially. So we can infer from that that life expectancy is lower. In the United States, it's, like I said, somewhere in between Mexico and Sweden, but you do see that there is quite a larger population within the reproductive age range. And then also looking at the females, versus male. Oof, sorry, I have the hiccups. The female versus male age range and the elderly range, obviously. So male life expectancy in the United States is lower than females. So there's a lot of information that you can gather from this graph. I do think that exams like IELTS and other kind of analytical exams, having the skills to be able to analyze graphs and things like that, and then to answer questions about what kind of information it gives you, that's a really good skill to have. You can also apply the same logic to Sweden when it comes to male versus female. So we could look at look at Mexico and say, okay, does the same pattern exist for males and females? And you can see that when it comes to the older ages, even though there are much fewer individuals in the older age range in Mexico versus Sweden and the US, you can see that the female population is still slightly larger than the male population in these age ranges. So you could make a hypothesis or an inference that over the entire human species, the life expectancy for males is lower than females. So this is what's called age structure, the distribution of individuals among different ages in a population. This is a really, really important aspect to look at when it comes to human population growth, especially predicting, like I said, the effects on the economy in the future. So it's not just that biology or population, what do you call that? whatever the ology comes with population. I don't even know what that's called, but the study of populations is important, not just for ecology and biological reasons, but also for economics and political reasons as well. If you look at countries like Japan has what's called a negative population growth. And if you were to look at graphs which are showing the amount of young people having children now versus like 50 years ago, I think maybe worldwide, except for maybe countries in Africa or in the Middle East, that you would probably see that there's a huge decline. So young people now are having fewer children, and they're also choosing not to have children as well. So biologically speaking, these graphs are important to look at because, for example, the very old do not reproduce. So if you see a decline in the number of individuals in a population for the reproductive ages, then that is a good indication that your population growth is slowing, and that it might be negative. Why that matters economically is because working people support the economy so that the older people rely on retirement, right? So like when you become a certain age, you retire from working and you rely on say like your retirement benefits or your savings, or maybe there's like a government program like Social Security, which also helps to contribute to your costs of living. If you have a very large older population and a small younger population, there's not enough economic stimulus, there's not enough money to support the number of growing elderly people. And that's the problem. I'm not sure economically in Thailand, but I know in the US that's a problem because younger people haven't been having kids as much as the older generations. Like my generation, millennials, Gen Z, not having kids as much as like the boomers. And I forgot what I think the greatest generation is the one after them, but they're like dying now. But the retiring age people the population of those people retiring is becoming too much of a burden for the government program called Social Security in the US. And they're estimating that the Social Security program might run out of money by the time it comes to like my generation or the millennial generation when they come of age to retire. There's just not enough money left because people just aren't reproducing as much. And that's why it's important to study population. I keep wanting to say population genetics, that's not it. Population science, I guess I'll just call that. So looking at these graphs, if you have a high percentage of young, that means that you're experiencing rapid growth. So Mexico would be an example of that you have a lot of people in probably the higher range of reproductive age that are having lots of children. And then finally, we have patterns of mortality. So what these three graphs are going to indicate is if you reproduce and you have offspring, do those offspring have a high chance of survival? Do they have a low chance of survival? If they survive, will they live to a long age, or are they going to basically die off when they're young? Or does it not matter? So there's three different types of mortality. So these are called survivorship curves. They show the likelihood of survival at different ages throughout the lifetime of an organism. Now for type 1, so we have a curve up here, type 1. The likelihood of dying is small until late in life. So what you're looking at on survival. Let's learn how to spell here. Let's say rate of survival. So the y-axis is the rate of survival, the x-axis is time. So for type 1, you have a high rate of surviving when you're young, but as you get older, you're going to die, right? But we live for a long period of time. Examples of this: human, elephant, whale would be another one. Turtles, turtles are type 3. So we have a high rate of survival when we're young. Organisms that have a type 1 survivorship curve are going to have a small number of offspring, like 1 or maybe 2, because you don't need to have a ton of offspring because we survive childhood is basically what that means. So you don't need to have a litter of humans. Like we don't give birth to like 6 or 7 humans at a time, because the one offspring that we have will survive, has a very high chance of survival. Type 2 is the probability of dying does not change throughout the life. So that's why it's a curve straight down. It doesn't really matter whether you're old or young or whatever, your chance of dying at any age is equal. A great example of an organism that experiences type 2 survivorship is birds. They're just as likely to die when they're young as when they're middle-aged as when they're old. Doesn't really matter. In type 3, you are very highly likely to die young, which is why the curve drops significantly in the beginning, because it's your rate of survival. But if you do survive, you live for a long time, which is why it, what do you call that? It doesn't just drop straight down, it drops significantly. And then if you survive, you live for a long time, which is why both type 1 and type 3 end up at that point at the bottom at old age. Sea turtles are a great example. So sea turtles, the majority of the eggs that are laid on the beach are probably going to die, but the fraction that survive will live to be 80, 100 years old. They live for a very long time. Hmm?
So, Treehugger, what's the importance of survivorship patterns?
Well, survivorship patterns are crucial in understanding population dynamics.
So, what actually do these patterns show us?
Well, survivorship patterns will show us the chances that a individual in a population will survive past reproductive age. Every species has a survivorship pattern that they generally follow. In the type 1 individual, you can see that there is a low mortality rate at a young age. This increases the individual's chances to survive to reproduction. A type 1 individual, like a mammal or a human, would only have to have
A mammal
few
or a
offspring
human.
because these offspring survive to reproductive age. Meanwhile, a type 3 individual, such as a lobster, plant, or other crustacean, needs to have a lot of offspring because these offspring have a high chance of dying at a young age.
Okay, this video is really stupid, but he did just say something that was important, which I forgot to mention, which is for individuals that experience a type 3 survivorship curve, they're going to have a lot of offspring because the rate of survival is very low as young offspring. So that's why sea turtles are going to lay like 100 eggs. Fish are another great example where they're going to, the female fish will release thousands of eggs, and it's a combination of both survivorship, but also what do you call it? The probability of having fertilization, because they practice what's called external fertilization. So female fish will generally, if you've got a big school of fish, okay, very weird fish I'm drawing here, never mind. So you have tons of fish here, and let's say the blue one is the female. So when she's ready to spawn, spawning is releasing eggs, she will generally go up above the school of fish. She'll release all of her eggs, and then all of the male fish will then go and will swim up and release all of their sperm. That's external fertilization. So two things that go against fish surviving and reproducing successfully. External fertilization, because you have basically like this whole area, and so you have a lower probability of sperm fertilizing eggs if it's not within like a uterus or a fallopian tube, like a very enclosed area. But then also you've got the survivorship curve, which is type 3. So there's a high probability that you're going to have predators that are going to see the spawning and be like, lunch. And then they're going to come in and eat a bunch of those eggs, because of course eggs are highly nutritious, have a lot of nourishment in there for the embryo. And so that also contributes to their low rate of survival as young individuals. And I'm definitely going to delete that video because it is really dumb.